Hello lovers, this is Tantra Talk and I am the Golden Goddess. Thank you so much for joining me for this very first episode of Tantra Talk. This project has been a long time in the making. I think the first time my guides nudged me to start this project was probably a good 3 years ago, and I've just been procrastinating and getting in my own way ever since. I'm sure some of you can relate to having an idea or a dream or something that you just feel like you have to do, but really not having the courage to just do it. And we all have our reasons, right? But here I am. And for this first pilot episode, I want to make sure I give you, the listener, a really thorough introduction to Tantra, as well as to the Golden Goddess, aka Stefania Lynn, me. So let's start by talking about Tantra. I describe Tantra as the philosophy of non-duality. This is one of the major concepts of Tantra, and Tantra is really this wide umbrella of kind of a way of being and a way of thought. It's not necessarily a religion, but I do compare it maybe to like Buddhism, where there's not dogma, there's no instructions of how to worship or any specific deity, if you will. But Tantra is a way of thinking, a way of life. So non-duality is referring to the dual nature that we as humans embody. And it's my understanding that this is a necessity to be in the third dimension and to exist in a body here on Earth. Humans are created dual. There's masculine and feminine bodies, and both are needed for the procreation of the species, right? And that's not just humans. We see that in all mammals and a lot of different types of animals from what I understand. You can also see this concept of duality as you look around your own life and your own surroundings. We have night and day. We have summer and winter, hot and cold, up and down. And then we have more elusive concepts of opposites like good and bad and right and wrong. And this is where I think Tantra has been really helpful for me as a spiritual path, because we're taught that the true nature of the divine, whether that's God, Goddess, divine consciousness, however you refer to that, the true nature of the divine is unity. It's one. There is no separation. And you'll see these concepts reflected in a lot of major religions throughout history. One concept that I've always enjoyed the visual of is the tree of life, which I believe comes from, I'm going to draw a blank right now, but it's like the precursors to Judaism is where it came from, the Kabbalah, I think. But it's this beautiful diagram. It was also found in ancient Kemet in something called the Manitou Neter. But it's this beautiful diagram of how God, or the divine presence, is at the top, and then how that splits down into pieces to experience itself. And then we're kind of at the bottom. We're the pieces, right? We're all the little pieces, all the little drops in the ocean that make up the whole, the God body. And then our task as humans is to figure out how to move back up that ladder, back to our divine origin. And we do that by kind of pulling all these fractured pieces of ourselves back together, back to oneness. So to begin this process of moving back towards unity with divine consciousness, in Tantra we practice something called the sacred marriage. This is an inner marriage between our own feminine and masculine energies. Now, before I go on, let me just give a light definition to what I'm talking about with masculine, feminine energies. These are not the same as describing gender role or sexuality. This is simply talking about the nature of energy. And in order to really kind of visualize what I mean, you can think about a battery. You have a AA battery you're going to put in your remote. And one end of it is a positive and the other end is a negative, right? And that's just telling you the flow of the current. So the positive, I might be wrong here, but the positive is pushing out the current and the negative is kind of receiving it and pulling it through this circuit. Excuse me. So we can think of masculine and feminine energies in the same way. Masculine is the one that's putting out, it's giving, and the feminine is receiving. So these two work together. And each of us is individual, so we have our own recipe, our own balance of these energies within us, and that's constantly fluctuating. There might be different days or different situations that call for you to use more of a masculine energy or use more of a feminine energy. So this is something that's kind of fluctuating all the time. But it becomes our responsibility to maintain the balance of our own energy field, similar to how we would maintain our physical health. And we do this by practicing the sacred marriage. We can do this as a very ceremonious practice, which I often do, but even more helpful is to begin to cultivate a deep level of awareness. More on that in a moment. So one more little note I'd like to add in here about non-duality is just a memory I have of reading Plato's Symposium in college. And I loosely remember this book as being all about love, all about Plato's ideas and theories about what love is. And there's this one story he tells about how, long ago and far away, humans once were dual, that they had two heads, four arms, four legs, and both male and female sexuality, or maybe no sexuality. I'm not sure about that part. But I do remember that the story goes that humans were getting too arrogant, trying to have too much power as God. So God punished them by splitting them in half, and thus became the male and the female, the two halves of the whole. And this was Plato's very creative way of describing an explanation for the longing, the yearning that we feel for that other part of ourselves, feeling like something's missing, longing for that love and adoration and that oneness, that togetherness, that as tantrikas we understand to be the nature of God. So by employing these philosophies and making these practices part of our daily routine, we allow ourselves an opportunity to experience that closeness, that oneness, that love energy of the divine. I would also describe Tantra as the path of indulgence. And this is really in relation to traditional religions that we are familiar with, the major religions of the world, Christianity, Catholicism, the Muslim nations, the Judaism, Hindu. Everything I've known or studied involves some sort of rules, right? Some sort of limits, some sort of renunciation of something. So this might be a restriction placed on the diet. This might be a restriction placed on your beliefs, right? You can only believe in this one God. This might be a restriction on your behaviors, especially when it comes to sexuality. A lot of religions want you to get married. They want you to be a virgin until you get married. They want you to only have one partner your whole life, or they want you to never, God forbid, go too far out of the box and have anal sex. Or I've even heard oral sex of being against people's religions. And fun fact, I think it's was illegal, right? Like in some places, maybe a time back, oral sex was actually illegal. It's just crazy. But side note, that being said, most of the religions that we're familiar with do involve some form of renunciation. And even in my yogic studies and Vedic studies, the yogis of old and the people that you hear about maybe 200-300 years ago in India, they're living, away from town. They're up on a mountain somewhere. They don't get married. They don't have children. Their lives are very simple and without a lot of indulgence, if you will. So Tantra is kind of the exact opposite of that. It's the path of indulgence. It's a philosophy that teaches us to follow your desires, that your desires are actually rooted in the divine. And if you look up the etymology of the word eros, which is the root of eroticism, it will reveal a divine origin, because in the philosophy of Tantra, our desires are actually considered divine guidance. So then it becomes our job to develop a very deep level of self-awareness, because Tantra asks, do what you want, but do it with awareness. This means having a very deep understanding of yourself, why you want this thing, why you're doing it, what you're going to gain from it, and then having been through the experience, being able to reflect back and allow that experience to be part of your spiritual journey, to lead you closer to that oneness with the divine. And a lot of times this is just, well, I'm not going to say just because, but I think a lot of times just the main component here is the experience. The more you experience, the more of God's creation you're bringing into yourself. One definition of love is bringing something in as part of yourself. So my understanding is that to be more like the divine, I must stretch myself and challenge myself to include as much of God's creation as I can. And really to include something, to understand it on a deep soul level, one must experience it firsthand. Another level to this whole do it with awareness thing is to test your own boundaries, to go outside of the comfort zone, to challenge you to have the courage to do things that you might be scared to do or embarrassed to do or your neighbor might not like or whatever it is. This is challenging you outside of that edge, outside of your comfort zone, which causes you to grow and expand. This is a very tantric concept, to trigger oneself intentionally in order to expand the consciousness beyond the borders of fear. If you read about the tantrikas, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of years ago, I know a common concept was for the tantric masters to be meditating on the crematory grounds. So there's literally dead bodies burning. And here are these tantric masters just sitting in the middle of the ashes with the stench of death, and they're just meditating and they're connecting and they're expanding to include that experience under that umbrella of divine love. So that's kind of an extreme one. Myself, I haven't done that, but something I do is go to the cemetery late at night, a lot of times 3 in the morning. And I started doing it when I was in high school, I think, because part of me just understood that being somewhere where you're afraid, but being able to find the center and be still and not let the fear overcome you. So you're transcending, you're transmuting the fear. It's very alchemical and very tantric. Okay, so I think that kind of sums up a good introduction to what Tantra is and the basic concepts. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about me, because that's the other part of the podcast, is the Golden Goddess. I am Stefania Lynn, and I've studied yoga and crystals and energy work of all kinds. I have a healing business that's been around for about 10 years, helping people keep their chakras and their energy bodies clear and open, and just educating people in general on how to maintain their own energy bodies. Because this is not stuff that's taught in school. We're not taught how to, regulate and process emotion, or how to tune into our inner landscape and really, feel what's going on with us and in our bodies, and then honor that. So my passion is really helping people get well in that way, and also educating on, self-maintenance and self-care. The other part of me that until today has been kept very separate and very private is that I spent over 20 years in the adult industry. From the time I was 18, almost immediately that summer, I started stripping. From there, started working in clubs, and then started working in Las Vegas, and then it escalated from there. And I've worked in clubs and brothels, and I did porn, and I've done modeling, and I've kind of done everything that you can do within the industry. And I ended up with a very successful career that I retired from a few years back, with the sole intention of really focusing on this and on my healing work. So it became apparent to me at some point in my career, towards the end, probably towards the last 5 to 10 years of my career, I really honed in on the healing aspects. And there were relationships that I had with clients where I was able to show up for them through hard times in their lives. And just through the exploration of different sexual fantasies and fetishes and traumas, how much can be learned about oneself and freed. Removing shame is a very powerful tool for self-acceptance and self-love. So as you can imagine, those things were a challenge for me in my younger years, especially being a sex worker, being a stripper, being in the industry. Most people in our society find it hard to respect sex workers. And like anything, this is, a very open topic that we can dive down the rabbit hole of. But those were hard things for me, to find self-acceptance in a society that wasn't accepting me, wasn't protecting me, was shaming me and rejecting me. So that's been the majority of my experiences through my career. Even though in my eyes, I am an outstanding human being. I have very high levels of integrity and I'm very professional. And yeah, so there are stereotypes around the sex worker, and those are not always true. So that's part of why I'm here on this podcast, is to give the younger me a voice, to give the sacred sex worker a voice, and maybe make a little space for her here on our planet. I have started doing a kind of a deep dive, a study of pre-patriarchal religions, matriarchal spirituality, and have come across many instances where in those environments, sexuality and spirituality were one and the same, which is the way that I understand it in my body. In Tantra, we have the masculine Shiva and the feminine Shakti. And Shiva is Shakti's cosmic lover, and she's calling out to him. And Shakti is that Kundalini, that serpent that's sleeping at your root chakra, at the base of your spine. And it's said that when Shakti hears the call of her lover, Shiva comes down and Shakti rises up, and they meet. And when they meet, your crown opens and your whole column fills with this beautiful white loving energy of the divine, and you experience that existential bliss that the divine really has to offer. So when I found Tantra about 10 years ago or so, it really helped me to come back from a low place in my life. I was having a lot of depression. I was struggling with self-love and self-acceptance after, 10, 15 years of being rejected and judged. And I just was kind of having a little bit of a crisis at the time. And I came across Tantra. I started reading some books. Another thing that really helped me at the time was getting my birth chart read by a very skilled astrologist. And even right there in my birth chart, it was sex everywhere. I remember the lady reading the chart, and like almost every house she's reading, and she's like, oh, there's sex in here, and there's sex in here, and there's sex in there. And it was just so validating for me to be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is who I'm supposed to be. And at that point, I really started getting in tune and getting in alignment with my purpose, and really understanding and accepting that sex is my medium. That's what I say, like a painter, their medium is paint, or a sculptor, their medium is clay. Well, mine is sex. It's just how I relate to people and the world. And obviously it doesn't mean I have to have sex with you to relate to you, but it does mean that the way that I help people heal is through the sexuality. And the way that I help people ascend is through the sexual energy. I teach them about, their true nature as a sexual being, and the nature of Shakti, the most powerful creative force in the universe, and how to connect to that energy, how to harness that energy, how to use and manipulate that energy, not just for pleasure, but for healing, for manifestation, for making change in one's body and one's environment, for giving birth to these huge ideas and projects that want to come through us. Shakti wants to flow through us into this world, just creating this beautiful mosaic of feminine energy manifested into the masculine. So the main reason that I've been procrastinating on starting this podcast is because I was really just scared shitless to come out of the closet and be fully authentically me, to allow the world to see all of me. Because for the last 10 years since I've started my healing business, I've really been hiding this. I don't just come out, and let people know who I am and my past. And, it's not for everybody to know. But I do understand right now on a deep level that this is what I need to do for my work. This is what I need to do to let people know that I'm here, to attract the people who need my specific medicine, whether it be to heal from sexual trauma or to learn how to live, super authentically as oneself, to really feel safe and remove shame that's in the way of expressing one's sexuality, whether that's how you dress, how you express yourself, the relationships that you want to have. It's such a big part of who we are. We are sexual beings. We are human beings. We are here because two people had sex. So it's time to remove the shame and the guilt around sexuality, to really learn and connect to the fact that this is our power, it is our birthright, it is who we are. And learning how to harness that energy to ascend and become more godlike, more like the divine, and to experience all that life has to offer, all the kinds of pleasure that are available to us. So the creation of this podcast is actually a very healing experience for me. I'm excited and honored to show up authentically as myself and create this safe space for everyone to take off the masks of shame, to show up authentically as their full selves and be loved and accepted just as they are and for who they are. Because we're all unique for a reason. We all have a specific medicine that's not for everybody. But I strongly believe that by showing up authentically, the right people will be drawn to me that need my specific medicine. So I look forward to seeing you next time on Tantra Talk. Thanks for joining in, and as always, peace.